Perhaps more than anything else, modern Britain has been defined by the styles and sounds of its streets. The way we dress and the music that soundtracks our lives is far more than just a matter of personal taste. It can be a reaction, a movement, a statement from an entire generation. From mods to skins, suede heads to punks, soul boys to ravers, junglists, indie kids, emos and grime crews, the history of our time is basically the history of its youth cults. These style subcultures have been iconised and bastardised by the mainstream, scapegoated by the media and appropriated by the high street. Yet somehow, we still keep producing these strange and beautiful movements. But how did this epochal journey from the bedroom to the boardroom come about? How did a few British kids, trying to look a bit different, come to impact culture in the way it did? How did our stylish nation take over the world?
Stu Story Volume 1, I remember getting that. That was £5 at the time, but it's got everything on it. I paid £30 for that. That's probably what my week's wages was in 1983. My earliest pictures would have been taken before this sort of mid-80s mod explosion happened. That's why I shot in black and white film, because we wanted it to make it look 60s. But, you know, other than the cars and the number plates, you could easily believe that's 1964, not 1984. When the mod revival came out, I kind of liked it, but I was too young. I couldn't go to clubs. I was living sort of away from most places. And then in 1982, I was 17, got my first scooter. So I went to my first mod club, and I remember going along and being terrified. I didn't know anything. It's the first time I'd ever seen anyone on amphetamines. And I remember going, there was like this Asian guy in a boating blazer, and he just kept repeating the same thing over and over. And I was just like, all right, mate, you know, there's no need for that. And then obviously I realised that what we'd done was taken speed. But going back then, we thought that there was some sort of code and the world had become mod-shaped.
1980, a year zero for British youth culture. This was the first time that young people considered the styles and sounds that came before them. It was a divided time in which the ideological lines of Labour and Tory seemed to tear the nation apart. And within these divisions, the youth of Britain seemed determined to divide even further. At the dawn of this new decade, it was the mod revivalists who were making the most noise.
Yeah, I'm still a mod. I'll always be a mod. You can bury me a mod.
This was a culture of young people who looked not towards their own bleak future, but to the early 1960s in order to create a new hybrid of mod and skinhead. This time, standing shoulder to shoulder with the second generation black and Asian kids they'd grown up next door to in the new, urbanised Britain.
When I was about 14, we'd all sneaked in to see Quadrophenia. Anyway, I saw this thing on the screen come alive and recognise what it was as mod. I went into Bury one day and went in the bookshop, and there was a book there by a guy called Richard Barnes. I remember being so excited and so inspired because I just thought, oh God, these kids look so cool. And they were original 60s mods. And then I got more refined about it and started working out what mods would wear. So I was like so obsessed with the sort of look of it all. The appeal to me was something different that was probably about meeting kids that weren't from your school or they weren't from your town. Kids from my background were being bred to get on the production line, and you'd probably end up in, you know, overalls or something. You didn't want to go out at the weekend and look scruffy. The punk ethos did not appeal to me. The idea of having like dirty hair and filthy clothes was like, I can't look like that, I've got to look clean.
Coming out of the mod revival from the 79 period to the early 80s, you had a diversion of the mod movement. We're going out of a street tribe, which was, you know, Parker Boys, etc., into pure authenticity, a purist look at mod, looking back directly 20 years before. We were following this style that was perfection of mod. If you think of like the mod revival, Parkers and Carnaby Street gear, you know, the cheapo stuff, that's not what you would call Avanjasi, a kind of peacock male. You can't be a peacock in a Parker. You've got to start to tailor yourself up, because you look at the guys in that club and they're all starting to wear tailored gear. By 85, this group of guys and girls, they start to think, well, we're different from those people that call themselves mods. We started to be known as stylists. That's when the movement splits totally. We had tailors in Carnaby Street, we had our own personal tailors all around London, and we were all the same. We were all mad. We were the first people to really go back and take the image from the 60s and try and get that authenticity.
Much like the clothes, the soundtrack to this new multiracial, politicised Young Britain also came from a different era. Ska, an infectious Jamaican pop sound that had been popular with the first wave of skinheads, was resurrected with a punk twist, as bands like The Specials and Madness captured hearts and minds with their tight haircuts and moon-stomped rhythms.
Rude Boys was like a cult thing in Jamaica in the mid-60s, where people dressed really slick and they were like criminals, you know, it was like underground violence. But I mean, it was just a fashion. We all needed an identity. I mean, the music and the clothes, but I mean, with the label, it's a stronger thing. It's a whole movement.
Being rude was a sense of style, but a sense of attitude. It's looking as best as you possibly can with whatever you possibly got. Post-World War II, you have every strata within Jamaican society which came over. You have regular folks, you have rude boys, and it was these men and women with their visual impact in terms of how they would dress, how they would walk, how they would be, which became the influence on British disenfranchised youth looking at these other young people who are coming over and who are cutting the best kind of swag that they'd ever seen. In the early 60s, the young modernists would see these black guys at a dance and would want to emulate their style because they were doing something that was completely fresh. They took an essence of what Rude Boys were doing. People wanted to replicate this newness which was being put together in a way that British kids weren't putting it together. In the late 70s and in the early 80s, there was a lot of political unrest, but bands like The Selector and The Specials stood for something which was black and white coming together, and the whole time two-tone was about the two cultures getting together. Bands like that would reference Rude Boy in their lyrics, and Rude Boy in their attitude, and Rude Boy in the way that they would dress. Bands like The Specials and The Selector were very much about people getting together and supporting and sharing music and culture.
Here it is, 1972. Extremely knackered, but that's because it's been used a lot. Originally, when The Specials started out, we were kind of like a punk band and a reggae band. So we play a punk song and we play a reggae song. And it was like they were two separate bands and it could have didn't work. And it was the same with how we looked, whereas with Ska, it unified the music and it unified the image as well. Punk had a very specific image. It was that whole DIY ethic, but we were sort of like, okay, well, let's not do it like that. And so we looked back to the mod ethic of the 60s. If you like, it was ready-made for me. It's like, well, okay, this is what people used to wear back then. This is what the Specials will wear now. You could buy a second-hand tonic suit, loads of them, because all the old mods had all got too fat or decided not to be mods anymore. And that followed Joe Danner's vision of recycling, of sort of using sort of second-hand stuff.
This is the wardrobe, all second-hand gear, very nice. Nice piece of Mohang.
Linval didn't like that idea at all, you know. Me now wear dead man clothes, you know. So he went out and got the tonic suits actually made. Don't know where he got the money from. We toured with The Clash for 3 weeks. I remember a very memorable show at Crawley Leisure Centre where an awful lot of skinheads travelled to see the Clash. The overwhelming presence was like turned up Levi's, Doc Martens, Ben Shermans, and a nasty attitude. And we realised that this was going to be our target audience, so I think there was a conscious effort to look a bit like them so we could appeal to them. It's funny because when I was growing up, these were the people who would, you know, intimidate the hell out of me at sort of youth club discos. To think that I was then sort of looking like a skinhead was kind of ironic at best.
Just dancing around like this, rapping about being emotional, being sad, being a teenager. And we just kept on watching videos all night. We're just like, who's Young Lee?